The crystal flutes chimed a delicate, constant music beneath the roar of conversation. From her position by the service entrance, Ilara Vance, known tonight only as Anya, watched the apex predators of the city feast. They moved in a sea of silk and jewels, their laughter sharp and brittle, their smiles honed into weapons. This was the 30th anniversary gala for Blackwood Holdings, a monument to a corporate empire built on the rubble of smaller, weaker companies. Companies like her father's. Ilara's grip tightened on the silver tray she held, the linen napkin beneath her fingers bunching into a tight knot. For 6 months, she had worn this uniform, a ghost in their machine, learning the rhythms of this building, the blind spots in its security, the vanities of its masters. Tonight was the culmination of it all. She moved through the crowd with practiced ease, her face a mask of polite neutrality. Her eyes, however, missed nothing. She saw Julian Blackwood, the heir apparent, leaning against a marble column, his smirk as permanent as the signet ring on his finger. She saw his sister, Serafina, holding court near the grand piano, her diamond necklace catching the light like a spider's web, trapping the gazes of all who passed. And she saw the king himself, Alistair Blackwood, standing on a low dais, accepting congratulations with a magnanimity that was utterly false. He was a shark that had learned to walk on land, and this glittering ballroom was his ocean. Ilara's heart beat a slow, steady drum of purpose against her ribs. She was not here to serve canapes. She was here to collect a debt, one that had been accruing interest for 15 years, ever since the day Alistair Blackwood had walked out of her father's office, leaving him a broken man with a worthless company. She refilled a glass with champagne, her movements fluid and invisible. The woman who took it didn't even look at her. To them, she was part of the furniture, a silent cog. It was the perfect camouflage. Her target for the evening was not the vault in the sub-basement, nor the data servers on the 45th floor. It was something far older, far more fundamental. It was the source of their power, kept not in a bank, but in a place of personal pride. Alistair Blackwood's private study, 3 floors above them in his penthouse residence. She had studied the blueprints for weeks, memorized the patrol schedules of the guards. She knew the code to the private elevator, the frequency of the motion sensors. All she needed was the moment, the perfect distraction to slip away. And she had a feeling the Blackwood children would provide it for her. They were creatures of impulse and arrogance, a volatile combination she was counting on. As she passed Serafina's circle, she heard a snippet of conversation. Honestly, Serafina said, her voice dripping with disdain, the quality of the staff these days is just abysmal. You'd think for an event like this, they could find people with a bit more polish. Her friends tittered in agreement. Ilara's face remained impassive, but inside a cold fire began to burn. Patience, she told herself, their pride would be their undoing. She continued her rounds, a silent phantom gliding through the gilded cage, waiting for the lock to turn. The opportunity presented itself as she knew it would, in a flash of casual cruelty. Julian Blackwood, bored with his sycophants, decided he wanted a specific vintage of scotch, one not being served on the main floor. He snapped his fingers in Ilara's direction, not even bothering to make eye contact. You, waitress, go to my father's study. There's a bottle of Glenmorangie 1963 on the bar. Bring it down. Now. It was a test, a petty display of power. Staff were not permitted in the residential levels during an event. But to refuse was to be fired and ejected. To obey was to walk directly into the lion's den. Of course, Mr. Blackwood, Ilara said, her voice perfectly even. As she turned, Serafina stepped into her path, a glass of deep, blood-red Chateau Margaux held delicately in her hand. Her eyes, the same cold grey as her father's, raked over Ilara. There was a flicker of something in their depths. Not recognition, but a primal dislike for the quiet defiance she saw in Ilara's posture. Serafina craved deference, and Ilara offered only silent, efficient service. It was not enough. Watch where you're going, Serafina hissed, though Ilara had been perfectly still, and then, with a deliberate, almost languid movement, she tilted her wrist. The wine, dark and ruinously expensive, cascaded down the front of Ilara's crisp white uniform. It soaked through the fabric, cold and sticky against her skin. A collective gasp went through the nearby guests, the stain spread like a fresh wound. Serafina smiled, a thin, vicious little thing. "Clumsy girl, this is a designer gown. You're lucky you didn't get any on me. Now get out of my sight. You're an eyesore." Julian laughed, a short, barking sound. Alistair Blackwood, who had seen the whole exchange from his dais, simply turned away, a silent endorsement of his daughter's sadism. In their world, the staff were not people. They were objects, and this one was now broken and stained. Ilara stood there for a moment, the wine dripping onto the polished floor, the stares of 100 wealthy guests burning into her. She could feel their judgment, their amusement, their utter indifference. This was the moment. The humiliation was the key. It was the perfect cover. She looked directly at Serafina, and for the first time that night, she let a sliver of her true self show in her eyes. It was a glint of steel, a promise. Serafina faltered for a second, her smile tightening. She had expected tears or frantic apologies, not this unnerving silent appraisal. "My apologies, Ms. Blackwood," Ilara said, her voice low and clear. "I will go and clean myself up." She turned and walked away, not with the hurried shame of a reprimanded servant, but with the measured stride of a queen withdrawing from a tedious court. She didn't head for the staff changing rooms in the basement. She walked toward the private elevator at the far end of the hall, the one Julian had inadvertently given her the perfect excuse to use. The red stain on her uniform was a badge of honor. It was the color of war. The private elevator was a gilded cage, ascending silently through the heart of the tower. Ilara watched the floor numbers climb, her reflection a ghostly image in the polished brass walls. The red stain on her uniform was stark, a splash of violence against the pristine white. It felt fitting. She smoothed the fabric, her mind perfectly calm, every action rehearsed 1,000 times in her imagination. The humiliation downstairs was a fire, but she had been forged in a much hotter furnace. This was merely the final tempering of the blade. The elevator doors opened directly into the foyer of the Blackwood penthouse. The air here was different, still and smelling faintly of leather, old paper, and Alistair's signature cigar smoke. The party below was a distant, muffled roar. She was in the heart of the enemy's territory. She slipped off her ruined uniform jacket, revealing the simple black shirt she wore beneath. From a hidden pocket in her trousers, she retrieved a pair of thin leather gloves and a small, sophisticated electronic device. Her movements were economical and precise. This was not Anya, the clumsy waitress. This was Ilara Vance, the architect of a reckoning. She moved past towering vases and abstract sculptures, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the marble floors. Alistair's study was at the end of the main hall, its heavy oak doors a silent testament to the power wielded within. The security panel next to the door glowed with a small red light. Standard procedure, which she had observed for months, was to deactivate the residential alarms during a gala to prevent false triggers from wandering guests. But Alistair was paranoid. This door, she knew, would have its own separate system. She held her device up to the panel. It was a frequency cloner she had built herself, using schematics her father, a brilliant engineer, had once sketched for fun. It whirred softly, cycling through thousands of possible codes. After a tense 10 seconds, the light on the panel flickered from red to green. A soft click echoed in the silent hall. The door was open. Inside, the study was a cavern of shadows and wealth. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room, facing a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a godlike view of the city lights. The walls were lined with books, but not the kind for reading. They were leather-bound first-edition trophies. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. And against the far wall, partially concealed by a heavy tapestry, was what she had come for: the Blackwood safe. It wasn't a sleek, modern digital vault. It was an antique, a colossal iron beast from the turn of the 20th century, made by a German locksmith long since dead. Alistair believed its analog nature made it impenetrable to modern thieves. He was wrong. He had forgotten that the oldest locks often have the most personal keys. Ilara knelt before it, her gloved fingers tracing the intricate scrollwork around the large brass dial. She didn't need a stethoscope or drilling equipment. She had the combination. Her father had told her the story years ago, a bitter anecdote shared over a cheap bottle of whiskey after they had lost everything. Alistair Blackwood, in a rare moment of sentimentality during their early partnership, had set the combination to the date their first joint venture was signed, the very day he had set in motion the plan that would eventually ruin her father. Her fingers moved with practiced certainty. 22 to the right, 81 to the left, 12 to the right, 98 to the left. Each number was a nail in her family's coffin. With the final turn, there was a deep, satisfying thud from within the safe's mechanism. She pulled the heavy, ornate handle, and the iron door swung open with a low groan. The interior was not filled with gold or jewels. It was far more valuable. It was filled with paper. Neatly stacked and bound in leather portfolios were the physical documents that constituted the very soul of Blackwood Holdings. In an age of digital transactions, Alistair was a man who believed in the tangible. He held the original, signed deeds to his flagship properties. He possessed the physical, unregistered bearer bonds that allowed for the untraceable movement of millions. He retained the master stock certificates that gave him ultimate voting control over his board. These were not copies. In the arcane world of high finance and property law, these were the things themselves. Without them, ownership was a matter of debate, of legal chaos. Without them, the Blackwood Empire was just a story. She found the primary portfolio easily. It was heavy, bound in dark green leather with AB embossed in gold. She lifted it out, her heart pounding not with fear, but with a cold, exhilarating sense of victory. Tucked inside her shirt, she also retrieved a small secondary folder, insurance. Then she closed the great iron door, spun the dial to reset the tumblers, and stood up. Her gaze fell upon the mahogany desk. On a silver tray sat a crystal decanter of whiskey and a single glass. Next to it lay Alistair's personal cigar cutter and a heavy solid gold Zippo lighter engraved with his initials. An impulse, sharp and brilliant, struck her. She picked up the lighter, its weight feeling significant in her palm. She flicked it open. A strong, steady flame leapt to life. This, she thought, was poetry. The fire that had built this empire would be the same fire that consumed it. She snapped it shut and slipped it into her pocket along with the portfolio. Her work here was done. Now it was time for the final act. Returning to the party would be a mistake. Running would be a mistake. She had a different stage in mind for her finale. She walked back to the private elevator, but instead of going down, she pressed the button for the roof. The rooftop garden was Alistair's private sanctuary, a place he often brought his most important guests to intimidate them with the sheer scale of his success. The city spread out at their feet like a carpet of diamonds. The doors opened to a rush of cool night air. The garden was deserted, an oasis of manicured greenery and soft lighting high above the urban sprawl. She walked to the edge, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. Below, the city was a breathtaking tapestry of light and life. For 15 years, she had felt crushed by this city, by the weight of the Blackwood name, but tonight, standing here, she felt as if she held it all in the palm of her hand. She didn't have to wait long. Her actions in the study had not gone unnoticed. She had deliberately left the tapestry askew, a subtle sign of disturbance she knew Alistair's obsessive nature would not miss if he returned for any reason. And she had taken something he would notice was gone almost immediately: the folder of insurance. It contained sensitive blackmail material on a city councilman, a file he reviewed every Thursday before a Friday vote. It was Thursday. Her earpiece, a tiny device hidden in her ear, crackled to life. It was a simple audio receiver tuned to the frequency of the head of security's radio. "Mr. Blackwood is on his way to the penthouse. He's not responding to calls. He looks agitated. All units, be aware." They would find the open study door. They would check the security logs and see the elevator had gone to the roof. They would come for her. Alistair, Julian, and Serafina. She was counting on it. She stood by a large, ornate fire pit in the center of the garden, the leather portfolio clutched in her hand, and waited. The hunt was over. The confrontation was about to begin. The doors to the rooftop garden burst open, not with the quiet swoosh of the elevator, but with the harsh slam of a stairwell access door. Alistair Blackwood strode out into the night air, his face a thunderous mask of fury. Close behind him were Julian and Seraphina, their expressions a mixture of confusion and indignation. They saw her standing there, the disgraced waitress, a lone figure silhouetted against the glittering skyline. "You," Alistair snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated with menace. He stopped 20 feet away, his security guards fanning out behind him, their hands near their holsters. "What is the meaning of this? How did you get up here?" "She's the one who spilled wine all over herself, Father," Seraphina said, her tone laced with contempt. "Probably came up here to throw herself off the edge in shame. Security, remove her." Ilara didn't flinch. She simply held up the green leather portfolio. "I don't think you want them to do that, Alistair." The use of his first name was a shock, a flagrant breach of protocol that made even the guards hesitate. Alistair's eyes narrowed, focusing on the portfolio in her hand. A flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of cold dread, washed over his features. He knew that portfolio. He had checked its contents just yesterday. "What do you think you're doing?" Julian stepped forward, puffing out his chest. "Give that back. It belongs to my father. You're a common thief." "A thief?" Ilara laughed, a sound that was sharp and humorless in the crisp night air. "That's a rich accusation, coming from a Blackwood. You see, this doesn't belong to your father." "Not really. It was paid for with the blood, sweat, and ruin of better men than him. Men like my father." Alistair's face went pale. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture he did not want to see. Who are you?" he asked, his voice suddenly strained. Ilara took a step forward, into the soft glow of the garden lights. She pushed her hair back from her face, letting them see her properly for the first time, not as a servant, but as a woman. "You don't recognize me. I'm hurt. Then again, the last time you saw me, I was 10 years old, watching from my bedroom window as you and your lawyers drove away, leaving my father with nothing but a bottle of pills for comfort. My name is Ilara Vance." The name hit them like a physical blow. Vance. The ghost of Vance Industries, the first major company Alistair had hostilely taken over and dismantled to build his empire, was a founding myth for Blackwood Holdings. A story he told of triumph and shrewd business. To be confronted by a living, breathing consequence of that long-buried act left him momentarily speechless. Seraphina scoffed, recovering first. "Vance, that pathetic little tech company. My father did yours a favor. He was weak." "He was trusting," Ilara corrected, her voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "He trusted his partner. He trusted his friend. And for that, you have lived like kings and queens for 15 years, sleeping in a palace built on his betrayal." She hefted the portfolio. "But a foundation of lies is just sand. And tonight, the tide comes in." Julian sneered. "What are you talking about? What's in there?" "Some old papers. You're insane. We'll have you arrested for theft, for trespassing, for being a lunatic." "Go ahead. Call the police," Ilara said, a chilling smile touching her lips. "Ask them to adjudicate the ownership of Blackwood Holdings. Because that's what's in this portfolio, Julian. Not copies, not photographs. The original articles of incorporation, the physical bearer bonds that fund your offshore accounts. The master deed to this very building and a dozen others. Everything that makes a Blackwood, instead of just a family of common crooks." The reality of the situation began to dawn on them. The arrogance drained from their faces, replaced by a raw, naked panic. Alistair knew she was telling the truth. No one but he and his most trusted lawyer knew the exact contents of that safe, of that specific portfolio. "This is impossible," Alistair whispered, taking a step forward. "Give it to me, girl. Don't do something you'll regret." "The time for regrets was 15 years ago," Ilara said. Her eyes locked with his, and he saw not the face of a 10-year-old girl, but the hardened gaze of a woman who had been fueled by a singular purpose for more than a decade. "You destroyed my family for profit. I learned from your lesson. I'm destroying yours for justice." From her pocket, she produced the heavy gold Zippo. She flicked it open, the flame roaring to life, a small defiant star against the vast darkness of the night sky. It was his lighter. The intimate personal insult was not lost on him. Seraphina screamed, No, don't. What do you want? Money? We'll give you money. Name your price. Ilara looked at her, the woman who had poured wine on her an hour ago, an act of petty dominance that now seemed absurdly insignificant. You still don't get it, do you? You think everything has a price. Some things are priceless. My father's life, my family's name. She opened the portfolio. With one smooth motion, she pulled out the thick vellum document on top. It was the original deed for Blackwood Tower, the crown jewel of their real estate portfolio, covered in official seals and the faded signatures of city founders. This is just paper, Alistair said, his voice desperate, trying to convince himself as much as her. It's all digitized, backed up. Is it, Alistair? Ilara challenged, her voice ringing out across the rooftop. Are you willing to spend the next 10 years in court with every asset frozen, fighting over digital ghosts while your creditors and rivals pick your company apart like vultures? Are you willing to bet your entire legacy on a judge siding with a data file over a signed, sealed original deed? I'm not destroying your money. I'm destroying your certainty. I'm destroying your name. And with that, she touched the corner of the deed to the flame from his own lighter. The old paper, dry and brittle with age, hesitated for a second before catching. A small orange tongue of fire licked at the edge, then greedily consumed the corner, turning a century of history into black, curling ash. The Blackwoods watched, paralyzed, as the flame began its inexorable march across the document. Stop, please, Alistair begged, his composure finally shattering. He took a clumsy step forward, but his own guards, unsure of the situation, instinctively held him back. Ilara ignored him. Her face was illuminated by the growing fire, her expression serene, almost beatific. This was not an act of rage. It was a ceremony. She held the burning deed aloft, a torch of retribution. The fire reflected in her eyes, dancing like triumphant spirits. This building, she said, her voice calm and clear over the crackle of the flames, was built on a lie. The fire consumed the main signature line. Its foundations are rotten. Julian lunged forward, but Ilara was ready. She sidestepped and pulled the next document from the portfolio, a sheaf of bearer bonds, each worth $1 million, untraceable and liquid. She held them out, and the flames from the burning deed leaped across the gap, catching the corner of the bonds. Your slush fund, she announced, her voice echoing in the horrified silence. The money you used to bribe, to threaten, to silence. The fire roared, hotter now, devouring the crisp paper of the bonds with a hungry hiss. Millions of dollars were turning into smoke and floating away on the night wind. Serafina was sobbing now, incoherent sounds of denial and despair. Julian stood frozen, his face ashen, watching his inheritance, his entire future, go up in flames. This was a nightmare from which they couldn't wake. It wasn't a negotiation, it was an execution. Alistair Blackwood fell to his knees. The powerful, feared titan of industry was reduced to a begging, broken old man. Why? He pleaded, his voice cracking. Why are you doing this? Ilara looked down at him, the burning embers of his empire drifting around her like malevolent snowflakes. She let the last of the burning deed fall from her fingers, its ashes scattering on the ground at his feet. She then held up the entire portfolio, the source of all his power, the heart of his kingdom. You took everything from us, she said, her voice soft but carrying the weight of 15 years of pain. You left us with nothing but memories and ashes. I'm just returning the favor. She tilted the portfolio downward over the glowing embers on the ground. One by one, she let the remaining documents slide out. Stock certificates, partnership agreements, deeds to properties from London to Tokyo. They formed a pile of wealth, a pyre of power. She didn't need the lighter anymore. The embers from the first deed were enough. A small flame caught the edge of the pile, and in seconds, the entire collection was engulfed in fire. The heat washed over them, a physical manifestation of the destruction. The Blackwoods could only watch, their faces illuminated by the inferno that was consuming their world. The fire alarm, finally triggered by the smoke and heat, began to shriek, its electronic wail a fitting siren for their downfall. Ilara Vance stood over the fire, calm amidst the rising chaos. She looked Alistair Blackwood directly in the eye, the man who had haunted her every waking moment for half her life. She gave him no smile of triumph, no sneer of victory, just a simple, devastating statement of fact. "You're bankrupt." The word hung in the air, sharper and more destructive than the shrieking alarm. Alistair's face, illuminated by the pyre of his life's work, crumpled. A guttural sound escaped his throat, a noise of pure animal agony. His eyes, fixed on Ilara, lost their focus, glazing over as if the intricate machinery behind them had finally irrevocably broken. He pitched forward, not from a heart attack, but from the complete collapse of his world, landing heavily on the cold stone of his rooftop sanctuary. "Father!" Serafina screamed, her sobs turning into a shriek of genuine terror. She rushed to his side, but it was Julian who reacted with the impotent fury of a dethroned prince. "You bitch!" he roared, his face purple with rage. He lunged at Ilara, no longer a calculated predator, but a wild animal. "I'll kill you." One of the security guards, finally snapping out of his stupor, tackled Julian before he could reach her, wrestling the flailing heir to the ground. "Sir, calm down, sir." Ilara didn't even flinch. She simply took a deliberate step back, her work here complete. The fire was the spectacle, the glorious, symbolic end. But it was never the true weapon. She moved with purpose toward the far side of the rooftop, to a section of decorative scaffolding erected for window washing. As the guards were distracted by a collapsed patriarch and a hysterical son, she swung over the parapet with practiced ease. The wind tore at her 100 stories up, but her grip was sure. She descended, a ghost against the glass, to a pre-arranged maintenance balcony a few floors down. A door slid open. Arthur Sterling stood there, not in a suit, but in the simple grey overalls of a maintenance worker. He was her father's oldest friend, his most loyal lawyer, and the quiet, brilliant strategist behind the night's true masterstroke. "Theatrics were impressive, Ilara," he said, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of awe. "How are you?" "Lighter than I've felt in 15 years, she replied, stepping into the service corridor. "How are we?" Arthur pulled a tablet from his pocket, its screen glowing with tumbling stock tickers and red arrows all pointing down. The fire was Phase 1. The moment the first emergency call was logged, an anonymous tip about financial insolvency was sent to every major news outlet. Phase 2 was the market's response. Blackwood Holdings is in freefall, and Phase 3, he smiled, a grim, triumphant expression, is us. For the past hour, our consortium has been buying. Every share, every bond, every piece of debt the panicked rats are dumping. They think the ship is sinking. They don't realize we're the ones who will own the ocean floor. He led her through the maze of service corridors, a hidden world of concrete and steel within the palace of glass and marble. "This was never just about burning paper, was it?" Ilara said, more a statement than a question. "Burning paper is revenge," Arthur corrected gently. "A public spectacle to create panic. The real weapon was never fire, it was mathematics. Your father's predictive market algorithms, the ones he was working on when Blackwood stole the company. You finished them." Ilara's lips curved into a small, secret smile. That was her hidden talent, nurtured in the shadows for years. Not corporate espionage, but a genius for numbers that bordered on prescience. Dad always said the market was just a story told by numbers. All you have to do is learn the language. "And you are fluent," Arthur confirmed. "You didn't just predict the panic, you quantified it. You modeled the precise cascade of failure, the exact point at which their institutional investors would lose their nerve and trigger a mass sell-off. The fire was just the first domino. Your algorithm showed us where every other piece would fall. Owning the company that destroyed your father, stripping his rivals of their name, their legacy, and their freedom, and then using their own assets to rebuild what they tore down. That is justice." They emerged from a service entrance 2 blocks away, melting into the growing crowd of onlookers. The street was a kaleidoscope of flashing lights. Ilara looked up at the tower, a monument to greed, now crowned with smoke. The next morning, the Blackwood Holdings boardroom was a scene from a shipwreck. Men and women who had considered themselves masters of the universe were reduced to shouting, sweating animals, their faces illuminated by the sickly green and blood-red glow of plummeting stock charts. The air was thick with panic and betrayal. The heavy oak doors swung open. The shouting died to a ragged whisper, heads snapping around in unison. Ilara Vance walked to the head of the table, flanked by Arthur Sterling. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the waitress uniform she had worn less than 12 hours before. Her calm was an island in their sea of chaos. Ms. Vance, a portly man named Garrett, sneered, his bravado as thin as ice. A bead of sweat traced a path down his temple. "I'm surprised you have the nerve to show your face. We know what you did. You'll be in prison for the rest of your life for corporate terrorism." "Will I?" Ilara's voice was quiet, yet it cut through the room's tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "On what charge? Arson? I believe the legal term requires one to burn another person's property." She let that sink in for a moment before Arthur placed a slim briefcase on the table with a soft, definitive click. "As of 6 a.m. this morning," Arthur announced, his voice level and devoid of emotion, "a private investment group represented by Ms. Vance acquired a 58% controlling interest in this company. The Blackwood family is out." And as of this moment, Ilara's gaze moved from one terrified face to the next. "So are all of you. You're fired." A man named Chen, the head of acquisitions, shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "This is insane, a hostile takeover based on market manipulation. We'll fight this in court for a decade." "Will you?" Ilara asked mildly. She slid a single piece of paper across the polished table toward him. It was a copy of a handwritten letter, the ink faded with age. "I believe you'll recognize the penmanship, Mr. Chen. It's your father's. A sworn confession detailing how Alistair Blackwood coerced him into falsifying the patent reports that bankrupted my father's company. Alistair kept it as insurance. Now it's mine." The color drained from Chen's face. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He collapsed back into his chair as if his strings had been cut, a low gasp escaping his lips. A woman with impeccably styled silver hair, Evelyn Reed, scoffed. "A forged letter and a market crash. This is slander. My record is spotless. You have nothing on me." Ilara's gaze settled on her. "Spotless? That's a bold claim, Evelyn, especially for a woman who used a burner phone to tip off her brother about the Azure pipeline deal 2 days before it went public." From his briefcase, Arthur produced a small audio player and pressed a button. Evelyn's own voice, crisp and clear, filled the dead silence of the room. "Sell everything in energy and put it all on Azure. Trust me." Evelyn Reed turned the color of ash. The other board members stared, the finality of their ruin sinking in. This wasn't a corporate raid. It was an exorcism. "That letter, those recordings, they were in the secondary folder I took," Ilara explained to the stunned silence. "The one Alistair thought was blackmail against a city councilman. A simple misdirection. He collected your sins like trophies, and he kept them all in the same place." She looked at 2 other men at the end of the table who had remained silent, watching the proceedings with an unnerving calm. "Mr. Davies, Mr. Cho, thank you for your cooperation these last few months. Your positions are, of course, secure." The remaining board members stared in dawning horror at their 2 colleagues. The betrayal was absolute. It had come from within. "This company will be restructured. Its name will be dissolved." Ilara placed a single, crisp business card in the center of the table. "We're back in business." It read, "Vance Industries." The public arraignment of Julian and Serafina was a masterpiece of karmic theater. Dressed in baggy orange jumpsuits, stripped of their jewels and their arrogance, they were shoved into the courtroom under the blinding glare of news cameras. The room buzzed with the schadenfreude of a city that had long despised them. Serafina's perfect manicure was chipped, her hair a tangled mess. Julian had a dark bruise on his cheek from his struggle with the guards. It was her, the waitress. Serafina shrieked at a journalist who shouted her name. "She set us up. Tell them, Julian. This is all your fault for sending her upstairs for that stupid scotch." "My fault?" Julian snarled back, his voice raw, turning on his sister in the dock. "You're the one who had to play the queen and pour wine on her. You just couldn't stand someone not bowing to you for 5 seconds. If you'd just left her alone, none of this would have happened. But no, you had to impress that polo player from Dubai by being cruel to the staff." The bond between them, forged in privilege, shattered under the weight of consequence. The image of the beautiful, powerful Blackwood siblings, now just two terrified, bickering criminals, was broadcast across the globe. Their humiliation was complete, public, and permanent. 2 days later, Ilara walked down the silent, antiseptic hallway of the city's most exclusive private hospital. A polished brass plaque on the wall read, "The Alistair Blackwood Wing for Cardiac Care." The irony was suffocating. Alistair sat in a wheelchair by a large window, a plaid blanket over his knees. He was staring out at the city, but his eyes were vacant. The shark was gone. Only a hollowed-out shell remained. Ilara dismissed the nurse with a quiet nod and stood before him. The rage that had fueled her for half her life, now a quiet, settled dust. "Hello, Alistair," she said. He didn't turn. His gaze remained fixed on the skyline, on the tower that no longer bore his name. Through the window, the reflection of a newly erected sign on a neighboring building was faintly visible. "Vance Industries. They named this wing after you. You paid for it with the money that broke my father's heart." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. It showed two young men, arms slung around each other's shoulders, grinning in front of a small brick building. A younger, hopeful Alistair and her father on the day they founded their partnership. She placed it on the table beside him. He kept this. He wanted to remember the friend he lost, not the monster you became. For the first time, Alistair's head turned, his movements slow and stiff. His eyes, cloudy and distant, focused on the photograph. A flicker of something crossed his face. A twitch, a shadow of memory. "Robert," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper of rust and disuse. Ilara's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't come for conversation, but she wouldn't leave without finishing this. She laid the secondary folder, the collection of sins, on his lap. "You know, I always wondered how you gathered so much leverage on so many powerful people. It seemed out of character. You were a brute force predator, not a subtle spy master." Alistair's watery eyes drifted from the photo to the folder. His hand, shaking with age and infirmity, reached out and touched the worn leather. A strange, rattling sound came from his chest, a dry heave that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Not mine," he whispered, each word an effort. "His, Robert's." The air left Ilara's lungs. "What?" "He was the good one," Alistair croaked, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkled landscape of his cheek. "The moral one. He found the rot. In the board. Chen's father. Reed's insider trading. He was building a case, a clean house. He was going to use this to force them out, to build the company right." Alistair's gaze met hers, and for a fleeting second, the old shark was there, swimming in the depths of his ruined eyes. "I just got to the folder first. It was easier to use it for control than for justice, easier to take the company than to fix it." The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. Her father hadn't just been a trusting victim. He had been a quiet warrior, fighting a battle in the shadows she never knew existed. Alistair hadn't just stolen his company, he had stolen his crusade, twisting his weapons of justice into tools of oppression. Her entire plan, her brilliant revenge, had been built on a foundation her father had laid 15 years ago. She wasn't just an avenger, she was a finisher. She looked at the broken man in the wheelchair. The pity she'd felt moments before was gone, replaced by a final, cold understanding. "So you didn't just destroy him," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "You became his ghost. A cheap, twisted imitation of the man he was trying to be." Alistair flinched as if she had struck him. He had no response. He had nothing left. The final truth had taken the last of his strength. He turned his head back to the window, the flicker of life gone, the emptiness returning to his eyes. He was a monument to his own failure, forced to spend his last days staring at the legacy of the man he had betrayed, now rebuilt and shining brighter than his ever had. Ilara took the folder but left the photograph on the table. She walked out of the cold, white room, the final shackle of the past falling away. This wasn't victory, it was destiny. A week later, she stood with Arthur across the street from a modest 3-story brick building, dwarfed by the glass and steel titans that had grown up around it. It was her father's original office. Workmen were already clearing out the debris of the pawn shop that had last occupied the space. "Are you sure you want to start here, in this old place?" Arthur asked, his tone gentle. "We could build a new tower, a better one." "It has good bones," Alara replied, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in memory. The ghost of vengeance had finally left her eyes, replaced by the clear, steady light of purpose. She told him what Alistair had said, the final stunning revelation. Arthur was silent for a long moment, looking at the old building with new eyes. "My God," he breathed. "So Robert, he was fighting them all along. He was trying to build an honest company in a forest of wolves," Alara said, her voice filled with a quiet pride that was deeper and more satisfying than any revenge. "Alistair just gave the wolves new teeth. Towers are for looking down on people. We're going to build from the ground up." She looked up at the dusty facade where the faint outline of the original sign was still visible. The name on the door would be a memorial. But the work they would do inside, the innovations they would create, the ethical standards they would set, the future they would build, that would be her father's true unfinished legacy finally brought to light.